Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. This is Ryan Gausch, Accreditation Manager. Thank you so much for joining us today in another COAMFTE Accreditation webinar, this one on decoding stipulations. Our accreditation specialists, Eric Shapiro and Jill Fogelman, are also on the line. Just to kind of give you some quick reminders, this webinar is being recorded and we'll post it on the website after the fact. We'll also be sending around the PowerPoint to the webinar to all the attendees after the webinar is completed. The first part of the webinar is going to be a little presentation that we've put together about stipulations, and the second half or so will be we'll take some of any questions you have and try to address them as best we can. And in order to submit questions on your GoToWebinar interface, on the right-hand side there should be a little kind of tab that says questions. You can type them in there, and we'll address them. Feel free to type them and submit them as you think of them throughout the webinar. Then once we're done with our presentation, we'll try to go through them kind of in chronological order, try to group them together as best as possible, but feel free to send them in throughout the entirety of the presentation. So just to get started, we want to just quickly outline some of the other trainings that we've done and some of the other trainings that we will be doing. Most of these are around version 12, but then some of them are also applicable to programs under the version 11 standards and programs still going through accreditation for the version 11 standards. But we've had presentations at the workshops. We've also had 3 webinars conducted so far specifically about the version 12 standards. We have this Decoding Stipulations webinar today at no charge. Upcoming for programs either looking to get renewed for their accreditation or looking to submit an application for initial accreditation. Since now the version 12 standards are in effect, applications must be submitted with the version 12 standards. And new to the version 12 standards are an eligibility criteria. So we would really encourage all programs either interested in seeking accreditation or renewing their accreditation to check out the upcoming eligibility criteria for Standard 12 webinar, which is at the end of May. There is a fee for that one, as the chair and chair-elect of the commission will be presenting it. For accredited programs, there's an annual report webinar scheduled for no charge at the beginning of July, and then we would also advertise the accreditation workshop for the upcoming AIMFTE annual conference in Indianapolis in September. As far as previous webinars and future webinars, they will be available on the website, similar to this one. So if you miss any of the webinars or can't attend any of the future webinars, feel free to check out our website to find out information on that. Additionally, I believe the PowerPoints from the accreditation workshop from this past year are available on the website if you want to check out those. So just next, I'll just go over a quick outline of what we'll be going over during this webinar. I first will quickly run through the accreditation process to see the lead-in to how programs kind of get their stipulations, and then we'll go into some quick. We'll spend some time on how you actually interpret the stipulations that you do receive in your action letter and kind of what action you'll need to take off of that. We'll then have a quick discussion about when you're actually submitting your responses, what the logistical and submission requirements are for that. We'll then detail the corrective action policy in both the steps programs need to take and the steps the commission takes. And then we'll also quickly address what being on probation means. We'll also highlight some resources available to you as a program seeking accreditation. And then, like I said, we'll have questions and discussion at the end for any questions that you submit throughout the presentation. So first, just to kind of go over the accreditation, to run through the accreditation process. These are all the steps that happen before a program gets a stipulation. And the reason I'm highlighting these are just to show how there are lots of opportunities to present the program's how the program is trying to demonstrate their compliance with the standards before you actually get to the stipulation. So before you get to even the stipulation stage, you would have had a back and forth with the commission about what your program is doing in terms of being in compliance with the standards. And so hopefully you should have a pretty good idea of where you stand and what areas you need to work on, what areas you're good in. First, obviously, you submit your self-study. The commission reviews that and sends you a self-study review letter outlining where you've provided enough evidence and where you haven't. Next, the program can submit additional information based on the commission's review. The program will then host a site visit. The program will then receive the site visit report and have the opportunity to respond to that site visit report. And then there's an accreditation decision based on all the information that's been submitted, whether it's from the program, whether it's from the commission, or whether it's from the site visitors. During each of these steps, everything that's sent to the program and everything the program sends to the commission is key element by key element. So it's not broad, okay, you're doing good in Standard 1, you need to work on Standard 2. It's broken down by each key element. You can get some good detailed information about what what a program would need to work on. As far as the actual accreditation decision, the action is taken at the COAMFTE meeting. It's voted on by the entire commission, except if there's anyone has a conflict of interest with the program. And the meetings are held twice per year in the spring and the fall. Decisions are sent to the program via email with an action letter attached within 30 days of the decision. So usually the spring meeting is held around April, so your programs would get the decision in May. The fall meeting is usually held late October, early mid-November, so programs get their decision mid to late December. The meeting dates are posted on the website a year ahead of time in most cases, so you can look ahead to see that when the meeting will be and when you'll be getting your decision, just so you can kind of prepare yourself in terms of workload, but then also if you need to inform any of your administration, need to have your faculty work on anything, you can kind of get a sense of when they'll get the action letter and you can start working on anything as needed. I've copied from the accreditation manual the actual language in terms of what the commission can do when they make their accreditation decision. And you see that it outlines the term of accreditation. And then I bolded for this presentation that a program with deficiencies may be awarded accreditation with stipulations provided they can be corrected within a specified period of time. I bolded that just because I want everyone to know that when it comes to an accreditation decision, the threshold for the commission accrediting a program isn't full compliance. It's substantial compliance, so there still can be some areas where the program needs to submit a little more information or do a little more work in order to determine or to show to the commission that they're in full compliance with all the key elements. And just most programs do get accredited with a few stipulations. It's very rare, maybe 1 or 2 per meeting, that a program will receive accreditation without any stipulations. So I just want to note that even if you get a stipulation, it could just be a minor thing. It could be one key element. It could be as little as one key element and one part of a key element. But the kind of key is that the commission needs to know that the program can overcome these stipulations within the specified period of time, which is for us the corrective action policy. So when the commission is meeting and deciding whether or not to grant a program accreditation or not, and they're discussing stipulations, what they're looking at, what their kind of threshold they're looking at is, do we reasonably expect that this program can address the areas that they need to improve within 2 years? And that's how they're determining whether or not the program should be granted renewal or initial accreditation with stipulations. Like I said, after the accreditation decision, there's a stipulation there's an action letter sent to you within 30 days of the decision, and in that action letter, again, you'll get a compliance statement for each key element. So in that letter, it will outline what the program has provided sufficient information for. It will also identify what the program hasn't provided sufficient information for. So it won't just say you've met this key element, you haven't met this key element. It will give you prompts not only on what you need to provide more information on, but the commission will let you know what they have reviewed and what they saw. And they do this just so when you're responding to any stipulations that you have, you don't submit the same information. You kind of get a sense of where the commission sees your compliance with the standard, and they also outline for you what you haven't provided sufficient information for, just so you know exactly what you need to address in any response that you give. Sometimes they'll also ask for specific requests for documentation, whether it's meeting minutes, whether it's updated syllabi. If you're changing your outcomes, they might ask for updated aggregated data for that. So sometimes they can get pretty specific, especially if in any of your prior reports you've said that you have a plan to put something into place. They'll probably ask in the stipulation language, they'll probably ask for a specific follow-up and documentation for that. In terms of once you get the stipulation and you're thinking about what you should submit in your response, just some key things to note in your response. First is that you really should address each section of the stipulation language. Sometimes the stipulation language is only a couple of sentences, sometimes it's a whole paragraph. We have some kind of examples of stipulation language that we'll go through in the following slides, and we'll kind of highlight how sometimes there can be multiple parts that you need to respond to. We wanted to highlight this for you all because oftentimes we'll see that the program will receive an action letter with a lengthy request from the commission. They'll respond to only one or two parts of it, and because they respond to 2 out of 3 parts, let's say, the stipulation is continued. They kind of miss that third part, and then the commission, because they stated in the action letter that the program needed to provide information on that third part, the commission therefore has to continue the stipulation if the program didn't address it. So you really need to be careful, reread the letter a couple times to make sure that you address each section in the language that you receive. When you're when you're putting together your response, it's always good to we always encourage people to include as much documentation as possible related to the deficiencies. I know when we're on site visits and when we're having phone calls with programs, we always say that if you have it, err on the side of caution and definitely include it in your response. You never know what may or may not demonstrate to the commission that you've gone the extra distance to come into compliance with the key element. So if you're debating whether or not to send in, let's say, meeting minutes or anything like that, you would send them in just so that the commission can see all the efforts the program is making to come into compliance. I know the commissioners probably aren't going to want to like the thought to read more documentation, but if the program is doing something, you really should make the commission aware of it. So it's always encouraged to include as specific documentation as possible, whether it's manual, syllabi, aggregated data, anything like that. In your narrative response, it's also good to specifically cite page numbers or appendices for the documentation that you're submitting. So in your narrative, you'll say, all right, well, in our program manual, we have policies regarding recruitment. You really should say in our program manual on page 15, we have policies regarding recruitment. That way you can kind of lead the commission to whatever document that they that you think will help demonstrate that your program is in compliance with the standards. Additionally, I know one thing that always helps highlight compliance with standards for programs is providing specific examples of improvement. With both the version 12 and the version 11 standards, there's a big emphasis on taking action based on any review you've done. So by including specific examples and, again, documentation of these examples, you can really demonstrate to the Commission how your program is completing the cycle of assessment. So whether it's changing syllabi, whether it's updating a manual, whether it's putting a new policy into place, as specific as you can be, tying it to the deficiency language, that would be that really crystallizes for the Commission what the program is doing. And then again, we can't say this throughout the entire process, but by the time you would be responding to stipulations, the Commission really is expecting that you would have aggregated data from your outcomes or from others. So as much as possible, if you could include aggregated data in your response, that would again go a long way in showing to the Commission that your program is doing everything it can to be in compliance with the standards. The Commission really isn't looking for raw data, so you really never need to submit raw data. It's only aggregated data that they'll need to that the program should provide. In terms of also once you get your action letter, when you're reviewing the stipulations, there's just a couple of things we would encourage you to review, and we'll go into more details about this later. But you should really review the accreditation resources we have available on our COAMFTE website. We'll go into more specific examples of what we have that may be helpful. You should also look at previous program submissions to identify what you have and what you haven't submitted. And then also we would encourage you to look at previous action letters and review letters. Usually throughout the process we try to keep the same program reviewers on the Commission assigned to each program. So there should be some consistency and progression from your initial review letter you got from your self-study all the way through all your action letters. So you can kind of, hopefully it should, by reviewing these previous letters, you'll be able to kind of track progression and see a pattern of what the Commission is looking for. And we would encourage you to look at other, let's say you have a stipulation on key element 1C, but not on 1B. But maybe when you got your initial self-study review letter, the Commission asked for additional information on 1B. It'd be helpful to look at what you submitted, how you submit information regarding 1B in order to not get a stipulation, because that may provide clues in terms of how you should address the stipulation that you did receive on 1C. Obviously it probably wouldn't help content-wise, but it could help in terms of identifying what materials, what type of narrative the Commission reviewed and said was sufficient versus what type of narrative, what type of evidence the Commission reviewed for a different key element and said wasn't sufficient. And then, as always, we would encourage peer consultation. And by this resource we have available for accredited programs is the AMFT community, or you could also find the directory of accredited programs and reach out to programs in your area. But it's always good to get peer consultation just to kind of get a sense of what others are doing to remain in compliance with the standards. As far as when you get your stipulations, some things that the actual language may highlight for you is where the Commission sees gaps in program documentation. This often is, all right, you said in your narrative you're doing this, but the Commission wasn't able to see any evidence that you're actually proving that you are doing what you're saying in the narrative. So the stipulation language sometimes will ask for specific documentation, sometimes also stipulations will highlight for you areas for where you can invest more in terms of resources. I know sometimes programs will be able to take their action letter to administrators as kind of an outside reference in terms of what the program needs in order to become to meet the standards established by their field. It's always good to have kind of an outside body saying that it would be helpful for the program to have more of this in terms of a resource. And in action letters, there's sometimes language that identifies where it would be helpful for more resources to be invested in the program. So you really could use stipulations. You don't have to see them as kind of a somewhere where the commission is saying you're doing something wrong or doing something poorly. Sometimes you can use stipulations as almost leverage to get more resources. That's something as you can say that an outside body made up of peers in the field whose mission is to ensure that there's quality education is saying that our program would meet the standards for our field better if we had this. So that's just one thing that the action letter and the stipulation language may highlight. And then also, kind of a third thing that stipulation language may highlight in some cases are steps in the cycle of assessment not yet completed by the program. And this is as of the last program submission. So if a program was reviewed at the fall meeting, the last submission that program would have submitted to the commission is their response to the site visit report. And that would have been sometime over the summer. So obviously a lot can happen between summer and fall, but the commission doesn't know about it yet because the program hasn't submitted any information about those updates or those changes. Because of that, the program may get a stipulation because they haven't quite completed a step in the cycle, and the commission will ask for evidence regarding that last step or wanting documentation regarding that last step, and that in those cases that's kind of where the program's response should focus on. So I think now we just want to quickly run through. I think we have 5 examples of stipulations that may be given to programs, and we want to highlight some takeaways in terms of when you're actually reading the stipulation, what should kind of stand out for you. We use different colors for this section, so it gets a little colorful in this part of the presentation, but hopefully not too bad. So this is just an example of a stipulation that you could receive for key element 2A, and this is, I want to note, this is the version 11 standards. We know programs are still going through the accreditation process under version 11, both the site visit, the self-study, and the stipulation process. And even though these are related to the version 11 standards, the language will be, and the format will be similar for future version 12 stipulations once programs are reviewed under version 12. But you see, first it outlines what the program has, and so first it outlines if the program meets or doesn't meet the requirement of the key element. And in this case, the program didn't meet the requirements of the key element. The language then goes on to address what the program did provide. And in the case of this stipulation, it then goes on to say that the program appears to have a plan to formalize assessment of faculty performance in some of these areas and plans to formalize the evaluation of adjunct faculty. Then it goes into what the program needs to provide in their stipulation. One needs to provide evidence of this plan, which is to formalize the assessment of faculty performance, and then the program would also need to provide the direct links of of how these activities and evaluation, direct links of these activities and evaluations to the program's educational outcomes. So there's definitely two parts in this stipulation that the program would need to address. And kind of as the key takeaways I highlighted below, the first is that the program would need to continue to report on a plan that they already submitted to the Commission, and then the program would also need to submit a narrative kind of expanding on the plan that they've already submitted. I do also want to note that when programs are submitting a response to stipulations, they won't need to address any of the parts that the Commission already said that they provided examples of. So for this stipulation, the Commission said that the program provided examples of teaching, learning, scholarship, services, and practice among the faculty. Because of that, the program does not need to submit further examples in their response to stipulations. Even though the program has a stipulation on the entire key element, they've already demonstrated compliance with that part of the key element. So just another example, this one's for 1G. This one's kind of a lengthy one, and I wanted to highlight that it gets lengthy, but there are two specific requests that the program would need to address in the response. And of course, it follows the same format as the prior stipulation, as in it outlines that the program didn't meet the requirements of the key element, and that also what the program has provided evidence of. And then it goes into that the program needs to provide evidence of a manual, and then at the end, it highlights that the program needs to provide evidence of a plan or process by which it will be reviewed and revised. The program would need to submit a response to both of these, not just one of them. So it's always important to make sure that in the response it captures everything. I don't think we have another one that we're just kind of quickly go over. This one I wanted to highlight for this one, that the program needs to provide evidence. That usually means, when it says provide evidence, that usually means that there needs to be some sort of documentation submitted, whether it's a meeting minute, whether it's announcements made to students or prospective students, anything like that. And then for this stipulation that we've put on the screen, it kind of gets at how sometimes stipulations will point to that programs need to finish the loop, close the loop in the cycle of assessment. So it says that the program already provide evidence that they collect feedback from communities of interest. That's not really the problem. The issue is that the program didn't provide evidence that they're using this feedback to inform the curriculum and teaching and learning practices. So in the program's response, they would really need to address how they're how the program is completing that cycle of assessment. And I think we have two more quick examples. This next one is the most colorful one. I had to use 5 colors for this, and I picked this one just because it's a good example of how sometimes the action letter and stipulation language will really pack in a lot of requests in a quick sentence or two. So for this one, there's 5 different requests that the Commission is asking the program to submit information on. While all of them are linked, if the program missed one or didn't submit information on one of these, the stipulation would be continued. So if the program in this case submitted updated program's outcomes, data for those outcomes, meeting minutes of how showing that the data was reviewed by faculty, and then specific examples of how the data was used to improve the program, but they forgot to outline in most likely a narrative format or a chart how each outcome is specifically measured. The Commission, because the Commission asked for this information, the Commission would continue the stipulation and the program would continue on the corrective action timeline. So it's just important to go through when you get your action letter to kind of go through and highlight each of the requests and make sure that the program has a plan in place to address each of them. I think we have one last example we want to highlight for everybody. And this one is just another example. There's two different parts that you'll need to outline, and specifically with this one, in that second request, how the students' roles allow the program to meet each set of educational outcomes. It's really important that in a program's response, it addresses each of the educational outcomes. Under version 11, that's the faculty outcomes, student learning outcomes, and program outcomes. I know it changes for version 12 in the sense that there are program goals and student learning outcomes. But if the program submitted a response and they only linked the students' roles to student learning outcomes and program outcomes, again, even though the program submitted a response to that request, it didn't respond to the request fully, and therefore the stipulation will most likely be continued. I think with that, we want to, before we get into the corrective action policy, we want to talk a little bit about how you actually submit your response.
So when submitting your annual report, or your response to stipulations, the basic formatting, you would have a single PDF document that is less than 20 megabytes. Within that PDF document, we request that you have bookmarks for each individual component of the document, so the response and narrative section, as well as each appendix that is included in the document. It would also be accepted if the program wanted to use links, hyperlinks within the document. That would be acceptable, but there does have to be that way of navigating, at a minimum, bookmarks. And then in terms of timing, the program's going to submit the document on or before January or July 31st, depending on the noted date in their action letter. In the actual response document, for each stipulation that a program responds to, they'll want to have the key element text, the stipulated key element text. Then they'll want to put the commission's review below that, and then have their response to that review. After that, they'll want to list any appendices that were referenced in the response. This formatting is very similar to version 11 form SS3. If you want to use that template for your response stipulations, that's fine, but we do ask that it is that formatting. And then any appendices within the document should be located after the narrative response. Just some key ideas to keep in mind when composing and putting together the document. You don't want to reference any material that's in another previous submission. So if it was in the self-study or previously submitted materials, you want to make sure that it's included in this response to stipulations. Documents there can be links to specific documents, links to, if they're on a website, you can feel free to link them there. We usually ask that you provide, if you're referring to a specific policy, that you provide an excerpt of that policy and its specific location, and then link to the entire document on the web where the commission can verify that it's in the actual manual or a program document. And that's sort of the basics on submitting your response to stipulations.
And now I just want to briefly kind of go over the corrective action policy. The items that I highlighted in red are taken from the accreditation manual, and we'll kind of go and expand on each of these steps. The corrective action policy comes into effect when a program is accredited with stipulations. Whenever a program, whether it's initial or renewal, is granted accreditation, if they have stipulations, they start in year one in the corrective action policy. And the first year is the imposed stipulations. When stipulations are imposed in the first year, you have to submit a compliance report, which Eric just outlined the requirements for, and there's a specific due date in the action letter which outlines when you need to submit that by. We also encourage people to review accreditation materials and consult with accreditation staff. In terms of attending accreditation trainings, the options we have available at this time are attending the training at the AMFT annual conference, but that's only once a year. So we've started doing these online webinars. You can attend any of those, and you also have webinar recordings that you can purchase and review those. There's also a list of consultants available from the accreditation office. This list isn't all-inclusive. There may be other consultants out there, but our list is made up primarily of longtime site visitors and former commission chairs. We want to note that all fees and services are between the program and the consultant, and all of their fees and services vary, obviously, and that just by getting a consultant, it doesn't mean that the program is 100% going to clear their stipulation, but we do find that it is helpful for programs to sometimes seek consultation. So if you want to get that consultant list, you just have to email COA@amft.org, and we can send you that right away. After I run through the next couple steps, we have a timeline, so you can see when the reporting requirements are, how much time the program has, and how long between reports and how long the program can stay on this corrective action policy. So after you submit your compliance report, it's reviewed again by the commission. Programs that fail to clear all their stipulations are placed on probation. If you have, and I kind of highlighted all there in my voice to reference that, even if you had 13 stipulations to begin with and you clear 12 of them, if you just have one stipulation remaining, you'll still be placed on probation. So it's really important with that first submission that you do everything you can to make sure you reviewed all the resources, you addressed everything in the letter, because just if there's one thing that you didn't address, the program will be placed on probation. It's kind of all or nothing. But if you are placed on probation, you have to submit another compliance report, and the program has to host a focused site visit at the expense of the program. This is usually, because we charge for site visits based on how many site visitors come. You're looking at least 2 site visitors, possibly a staff person. So this is at least around $4,000 that it would cost the program if they are placed on probation. When they host the focused site visit, the site visit is only, the scope of the site visit is only to the key elements where there are stipulations remaining. So again, if you had just one stipulation remaining, the team's going to come in and meet with your different groups and examine on-site documentation related to just that one key element. It's not a re-review of the entire program. It's just a review of the whatever stipulations are left. In terms of just the logistics of that, after you get your action letter, accreditation staff will contact the program regarding the logistics, and that means the agenda, but then also what dates site visits are. For the site visits are hosted on Monday and Tuesday, and site visits are scheduled in the regular site visit cycles. So in the spring, usually from about mid-March to mid-May, and in the fall from about mid-September to late November, early December. So program would do that once they're placed on probation, and then all the information, the compliance report, the site visit report, and the response to the site visit report is submitted to the commission. They review it again, and the entire commission votes on whether or not the program cleared the remaining stipulations. Again, this is kind of an all or nothing thing. If you have 5 stipulations when you're on probation, and at the end of year 2, the commission decides that you've demonstrated compliance with 4 of them, and you only have 1 remaining, that 1 remaining stipulation will cause the program to lose its accreditation status. So again, it's really important that you address every part of the stipulation and address all key elements as much as possible. Programs that do clear all their stipulations are removed from probation and considered fully accredited for the remainder of their original term. There's no extensions granted, so if you were granted accreditation for 5 years with stipulations on 10 different key elements and you cleared all of them by the end of those 2 years, you don't get an additional 2 years or anything like that. You continue on your original term. And like it says there, programs that fail to clear all stipulations may have their accreditation status revoked. If the accreditation status is revoked, programs may submit a request for reconsideration and appeal. So it's not, their accreditation status is revoked, but that action isn't finalized until the program either uses its right to request a reconsideration and appeal or chooses not to exercise that option. I'm not going to go into the request for reconsideration and appeal process in this webinar just because it gets a little too detailed for this, but it essentially just consists of, for the request for reconsideration, the program submitting information in terms of asking the Commission to reconsider its original decision based on information, or the program can also appeal if they felt that generally the Commission didn't follow their established policies. There's more information about both of these in the actual accreditation manual, but that was just kind of a quick review of them for now. And this is just an example timeline I put together. You'll see what the program is working on in the middle column and what the Commission is doing in the right-hand column. So just to kind of give you a sense of what the timing of all this is, I used the imaginary program that submitted their self-study on October 1st, 2014. After that, the Commission reviews it. Then in the spring, the program hosted a site visit, submitted their response to the site visit report. All that information was sent to the Commission for a review at their fall 2015 meeting. Let's say that program was granted initial accreditation with 5 stipulations. They would get that decision usually in, like I said, in sometime in December. They then have 7 months to submit their to do their research, make any program changes and improvements they need to make, and submit their compliance report on July 31st of the following year. Again, that information is reviewed by the Commission during that time period up until the fall meeting. And let's say the program cleared 3 stipulations and 2 stipulations were continued. Because of those 2 stipulations, the program would be placed on probation and would have to have a site visit. The site visit would be scheduled during the next regularly scheduled site visit cycle, which would have been the spring 2017 in this case. The program would get the site visit report. They would respond to the site visit report. They would also submit a response to stipulations just on the 2 stipulations that were still continued. And again, just to highlight, the focus site visit would only be on the 2 stipulations. It wouldn't be on the 3 stipulations that I cleared. It wouldn't be on all the key elements. It would just be on the 2 key elements with stipulations. All the information that's been submitted up until that point would get sent to the Commission, and then if all the stipulations are cleared, the program is removed from probation and continues on their normal accreditation cycle, or their accreditation status is revoked and they have those requests for reconsideration and appeal options available to them. But that's just kind of giving you a brief rundown of the timing in terms of when you get your action letter with your stipulation, you usually have about 6 to 7 months to put together a compliance report based on any changes that you've made. So I quickly want to just talk a little bit more about when programs are placed on probation, and that's again at the start of year 2. If they have just 1 key element with the stipulation, they're placed on probation. I want to highlight that it's not an appealable decision, because when a program is granted their accreditation, it's also they have to accept their accreditation, and then also all the policies and procedures that go along with it. And The corrective action policy is one of those policies. So because the program has already agreed to the process, they can't appeal that they're placed on probation because it is what the policy that they've agreed to outlines. The probation status is noted to the public in the following ways. It's listed on our directory of accredited programs, and it's also sent to the public via notice of actions, which is sent to program directors, site visitors, licensing boards, other accreditors, and it's usually sent out via the AMFT e-news. So just to be aware that it is noted in the public in the following ways. And when programs are placed on probation, programs are encouraged to notify stakeholders, including their students, any prospective students, faculty, and administrators. We say, especially for students, faculty, and administrators, you should notify them of the program being placed on probation and what this means, because when a program is placed on probation, a site visit will be warranted and a team will be sent to the program, and these various groups will need to meet with the site visit team. So it's always important to kind of get them into the loop and give them context to why the site visit is happening. So we would just encourage you to notify these stakeholders as soon as possible. And if you have any more questions about probation, we can answer them here or address them via email or phone call. I think with that, we just want to quickly highlight, before we open it up for questions and answers, we want to highlight some resources that we have available for you all.
Ryan's touched a lot about a lot of the resources that are available to you, and all of these resources are on the new COAMFTE website, which is www.coamfte.org. And as Ryan mentioned previously, this year we now have the recordings of the webinars that we've been conducting on the website available for you to purchase or to view. And another resource that is available also on the website is some previous training PowerPoints that have been given for both Standards version 11 and Standards version 12. There's also in the resource, the webinars and the PowerPoints, if you're looking for them on the website, they're in the webinars and training page on the website. The Standards Interpretation Guide is also available on the website, and that's a very helpful resource that gives both a rubric for responses that you can get to the stipulations, and also it gives examples of documentation that the Commission's looking for. The Standard Interpretation Guide is available on the resources page of the new website. Also on the resources page is the cycle assessment, and that discusses the cycle of assessment and links to specific key elements that the Commission is looking for, so that it closes the loop of when they're asking for certain links and how to close the loop of the cycle. This is a good reference to go to see what the Commission is looking for. As Ryan mentioned earlier, also, if you're considering a consultant, there's a list available at the Accreditation Office, so we recommend that if that's something that you might want to look into, that you contact the Accreditation Office for a consultant list. And there are several other resources on the website, including the accreditation manual, also the standards manual itself for both version 11 and version 12, and so most everything, all the resources that you would need to respond to your stipulations would be available on the website.
Great. All right, with that, I think we wanted to open it up to any questions that you have. Like I said at the beginning, there should be a little box on your GoToWebinar interface where you can type in the questions. So we'll try to get to them. We'll just put that up there. Let's go to the end. So the first question that I'm seeing is, keep going. Should stakeholders be informed if the program has stipulations? So the first time the program will be notified that they have stipulations is the action letter stemming from the meeting when they receive their accreditation decision. That letter is made public and is published on our website as part of our notice of actions. And it generally is a good idea to inform your stakeholders if you're attached stipulations, just so they have an accurate depiction of what type of accreditation the program was granted. Because they are kind of tied together timing-wise, it would be, and just to be fair about disclosure, it would be good to be like, we got accredited for 5 or 6 years with these stipulations, and then also to provide them a little context of what stipulations mean. It could, like kind of got out earlier, by letting people know what the stipulations are, you can also notify everyone via that method what the program intends to work on over the next 6 months to a year. Sometimes the stipulation language are a little like inside baseball, where it might not be relevant to all communities, but sometimes the stipulations do highlight things where the program is working on that could definitely benefit students, whether it's an updated manual, whether it's making links to the goals and outcomes clear, anything like that. Yeah, we would encourage you to notify stakeholders once the program has stipulations. The reason we specifically highlight to inform people that they have probation, that the program's on probation, is one, because of the site visit, and also because the next possible step is that accreditation may be revoked, which would be very relevant to all the stakeholders, especially students and prospective students, who, and the accreditation is one of the benefits of accreditation is protecting students. So we just want to make sure everyone's kind of aware of where the program status is with accreditation, especially since accreditation status and licensure are so important, so vastly linked. So are there any, if anyone else has any other questions, you can type them in. I'm not seeing any right now, but we'll give it another minute or so just to see if anything comes up. Like I said, we'll send out the PowerPoint after the webinar, and if anyone has any questions, you can respond to that email, or call us, and we'd be happy to address them. Maybe your question deals more specifically with a program-specific example. Just another question came in. Turning our response to stipulations early will not speed up the removal of stipulations, correct? You can, so there's 2 submission, throughout the year there's 2 submission periods for responding to stipulations. They are July 31st and January 31st. I'll just go back to this fake program so I can kind of hopefully visually show it. So this program was granted their accreditation at the fall meeting. They would have gotten their action letter sometime in December, and they're not due to submit their response until the end of July. The other reporting deadline for response to stipulations is January 31st. The program can submit their response to stipulations early on that January 31st deadline, but they're not required. It will be reviewed, and well, it can be submitted, and staff can kind of review it to make sure it meets with the submission requirements. We can kind of make sure it addresses each of the key elements, but it wouldn't be reviewed until the fall meeting. You wouldn't be able to clear the stipulations early, but you can kind of get a head start in making sure that what you submit addresses what the commission is asking for. And just be aware that there are two submission timelines. So another question came in. I understood that a response stipulation should be quote-unquote comprehensive or quote-unquote standalone. So the response would include information from the self-study or any other submission. Did I understand you to say today that the response should only include new information or the requested information, only the requested information? Yeah. Eric, do you want to?
Yeah. The response should be all inclusive of any information noted within the response. You should only respond to the information that was requested by the commission, the areas that were requested. In terms of new information, there should usually be new information. If information was requested, it usually either meant the commission, it wasn't in the document. Sometimes it's not, the commission isn't able to identify it. But if you believe that to be the case, you should contact staff after you get the initial review, and staff can review the document and what was reviewed by the commission and contact the commission if necessary to make sure that even if you believe that you had provided the information that is requested, whether it was insufficient or not. Staff can help to clarify that if that question does arise within the process. So yes to sort of both points, that it should include new information and it should include the requested information.
Yeah, I guess another point kind of off that is the request or the response stipulations shouldn't say, well, as we reported in our self-study, XYZ, you really should report, you really should respond to the stipulation language in the response, not just point to other documents, because the commissioners do a pretty thorough review of what the program has submitted. So chances are that even if you think it's in there, the stipulation language, because the program was attached to stipulation, that meant that the evidence that was provided didn't reach the level that the commission wanted to see in their response from the program. But yeah, as much as you can avoid saying, as we submitted in the self-study, as we submitted in the response to the report, that'd be helpful. Yeah, if there's any other questions, we can wait another minute or two to see if any other ones come in. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in. Yeah, we'll be emailing this PowerPoint out to everyone probably today or tomorrow or Monday. And obviously, like I said, you can always email us if you have any more questions. But thank you for joining us today, and we hope it's helpful. And we hope everyone has a good rest of the day and good weekend. So thank you for coming. Bye.